concept, the narrative, some of the locations were also changed to accordingly fit themselves and make themselves much more contemporary in that sense. But yes, you are right. It did start off as a graphic novel idea initially.
And I personally saw you paid a lot of attention to the color palette. You know, the blue and the red, right? Which I understand is also the fabric that the Khasi people used traditionally. This is my memories of 1985 to 1991 or Ceylon. Right? So was that conscious work that you were doing? I mean, we can sit down since we're having a chat.
I think you've been hanging out at NIFT for too long, but but yeah, the fabric. The red, actually, it's more of red and yellows that we see, but also a little bit of the blues thrown in, and also just trying to have a certain kind of a continuous color throughout the film, and looking at what those particular colors do in particular moments. And for example, in the whole long take sequence, there's a lot of red there, and I believe like someone knew that it was headache inducing, and I said yes, that's in my head, that's perfectly what the intention was. But yeah, I mean, there are very conscious elements in the film that are quite evident.
Okay, and from the fabric, I wanted to bring in, particularly to my next question rather. I somehow felt that there's a lot of layering, like enmesh, the warp and the weft of the fabric, which is your sonic imagination. For the first frame to the last frame, you're using with folk, and from folk you get into your own bass kind of a grunge, and then you play with structure. Maybe just go into a little bit of the sonic space. What are you doing there?
My foray into the arts, much before film, has been through music. So my entry point into the arts, so to say, has always been through music and through sound. And I often say this in lectures and when I'm interacting with the young audience, that if cinema is 24 frames or whatever, 120 frames per second, sound is every millisecond of truth.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy working with sound because you can evoke so many images in your head, such a range of emotions without using the visual medium. And I think also because after I lost my eye, I think my sonic sensibility and my sonic range is also perhaps increased in that sense. And I was very keen that throughout the film, these nuances of the folk was very evident, as a community, we always had an oral tradition, and written form only came much later in the 1840s. So the bulk of our knowledge has been transmitted through stories and music, and I'm also interested in how these traditional forms of knowledge are being stored. What are these repositories of this traditional idea of knowledge? How are they disseminated in this day and age? Can myth be? I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Patnaik.
Yeah, Mr. Chandravanu Patnaik, Professor Patnaik should be here somewhere.
Yeah, and the fact that the creation of myths and the fact that even new forms of media storage, be it cell phones or the Nagra recorder or the television or the VHS, or even for that matter now, the internet is a site where a lot of myths are created, and it's all of these are time and space defined. That we are creating a democratic space where more myths can be created, and I'm interested to see how these old stories transform themselves into this present day and age. I screened the film once to a bunch of friends, and they said, it's quite spectacular because the ramifications or the interpretations of these myths can be applicable to so many different other communities. The fact that you can be lynched for possessing something. And I told myself, I didn't even think of that when I was writing the film. But the implications of these folk stories is that they always have a certain sense of truth depending on the reality of the time and space in which we choose to analyze them.
Yeah, I think that brings me to your next thing that you're very clearly playing on, the outsider-insider dichotomy. Yeah. The question of indigenous. Who is indigenous? Correct. Then who is a mongrel? Yeah. Right? Yeah. The same seems to be half tribal and half Bihari or whatever he might be. Look, then who is the person who is native of the land? I think that's very interestingly posed. You don't take a stand, but you're raising it to the different characters. Right? So, and maybe that also gets a reflection of some of the work that you do in your music and your Khasi New Wave work that you're doing. A question of ethno-nationalism that is, all over the world, and particularly now since 2014 in our country.
I mean, I've always been interested in subjects that are related to identity studies, and not because it just caters to this kind of an academic palette. It's the reality that I've lived. So a lot of the experiences that I've had with regards to my film, my music, has been very experiential. It's suddenly, I didn't suddenly become a chola kurta when I entered New Delhi. My politics was something that I've always lived with all my life. But we also enter a space now where a lot of these so-called barometers of measuring indigenous identity are blurred, And I had this wonderful conversation whereby, the notion of what makes someone native to that land will be subverted as we progress into, in the next few years and the next few decades, At one point of time, there was this fascination to appropriate Marxism and tribal identity, and similarly with the Kalyan Banpas ashram, there's an attempt to, but now people are straying from both of those ends, and they're slowly starting to assert themselves based on how they fully understand and comprehend themselves. Of course, you cannot escape ideology, but there is also much more of an inward looking to assert who you are, where you've come from, your relationship to the land. How is that not being accommodated in the constitution? Is the land just yours, or everything that belongs to the land also yours? And these things are also quite pertinent in a state such as Orissa, which has a huge tribal population. So, and yet at the same time, people say, "Oh, but you don't look like a tribal." So this kind of class treachery is also, being thrown upon. Why are you not? There's an imagination that if you're from a certain community, that's how you should remain. There's this complete class treachery that we are so burdened with. But it's important to also have an aspiration of your own, and that aspiration perhaps of your own can also go against the grain of the identity that you come from, and this is what we experience now, that there is a huge leap from this whole idea of indigenous identity that a lot of young people go through. How much of their tradition and the indigenous identity should they cling on to, and how much of the so-called modernity should they grasp, and therefore, in that sense, in that kind of transition, do they still retain their indigeneity? And then these are the kind of questions that I play with, and I don't have a stance because it's an ongoing dialectic in that sense. I don't think there's a debate that I can say, you.
I think one of the key things that he's talking about, maybe some of our young friends can look it up, Wanphrang Diengdoh, which is a huge impact in terms of how you integrate scheduled tribes into the mainstream. And it's a very interesting project that has played out. Every decade it has had a new manifestation. So, okay, so I think we will carry on our conversation. I have a lot of other points to get into, but we'll take it into a longer conversation. So maybe we can open it up for our audience.
Hi Wanphrang. What I wanted to ask is, whatever the nuances that you just talked about right now, the various questions of culture, identity, everything else that you're talking about, you chose to explore that through a filmic trope that was of a private investigator. And since you were dealing with so many things that were very much intrinsic to Meghalaya or Shillong and how that plays out on a larger narrative, but you're doing that through this private investigator who is styled in a particular filmic way. It has how he is stylized and the kind of history he has, that he had a pregnant wife, he was a drunkard. It's a classic private investigator story in that sense. So why pick up a private investigator to become the central filmic trope that has to experience this dilemma unfolding? Why I ask this is because is there a literary tradition of a private investigator mode of storytelling that we've seen in Bengal, through Feluda or people, or it is just something that you wanted to do as an artist and tell them. Yeah, that's what.
I mean, couple of things. One is that he doesn't even function as a really good detective in that sense. And it just so happens that he lives in a small town and everyone knows everyone, and sometimes that's a good premise to also get into these kind of things. Number one, but the second thing is if you want to speak about it in a very film form, history, language. I was doing a film on the First World War, and that took me 4 years, and I was traveling pretty much all around the country, following the journey of indigenous labor during the First World War. A lot of them were conscripted, and a lot of them went to France and Mesopotamia and saw the world for the first time, so to say. And obviously we know about the treacheries and the hostilities and the damage that the First World War has done to the world. And if you look at your film, say Genesis, German expressionism sort of immediately came about that time, and then later on the whole noir tradition traveled to America and it picked up. So I guess it was also the fact that I was just spending so much time in this First World War that it almost in a parallel universe that I also exist was informing my work subconsciously. And there is no such tradition as perhaps a Feluda that you would have in Bengal. But I think also the other thing that I really wanted to stress upon is the fact that every household was at the cost of sounding exotic. Every household was also the center for stories. Like every hearth, the fireplace was the center from where folk tales and legends and lores and moral stories and folk music was being performed. And that for me was very important to address the fact that you are by default a storyteller, and you need to be able to communicate your own history forward if you come from that community. So in other words, it's this kind of responsibility that you have, but also to flip that completely over when television came, when sites announced their satellite channels and when Rupert Murdoch arrived and brought cable TV, suddenly the hearth was no longer the center of attention, and our grandmoms who would tell us stories sort of became secondary, and they took backseat. I lost both of them a couple of years back. They've been very instrumental in shaping my idea of art and the world. So they took a backseat, and then suddenly you're watching the Gulf War, the first televised war ever, and subconsciously, you're also being made to choose sides, because there's a subtle kind of an injection of messages that happen at that point in time. But yeah, I mean, we're all storytellers, and I love the fact that whatever kind of a social gathering you go to, there'll always be some guy there who will have most of the stories, and everyone's sitting around him because, yeah.
Hi, Wanphrang. I loved your movie, and I have 3 questions in mind. So,
I start with one, because I've got terrible memory, but one and
okay. So, I see that you're playing with colors, and the only prominent red color that we see in the movie, well, 2. The one is Shen's scooter, and the other is blood. So, are they supposed to kind of imply each other, since Shen's wife dies on that scooter itself?
Yeah. Is the second question also related to that? That I'll remember. The second.
No, the second one is completely different.
I spent quite a bit of time on the whole coloring of the film, because I wanted to make the dream sequences and the fantasy sequences and the folktale sequences more vivid, and also in my own way, without preaching to the world that some of these stories that we have are much, much more vivid. Sometimes if we leave things with the imagination, they're much, much more vivid. So that was what I was trying to work on. So all the colors that you see, which are not there in the dream sequences or the fantasy sequences, they're a few shades shy of the primary RGB, And then what happens is that once you start seeing those very vivid colors in those particular dream sequences and in those particular blood sequences and the scooter. It satiates your brain's desire to see primary colors, which is why traffic lights are a certain color, because we can see them from a distance. But it was just a little bit of fucking around with people's heads.
Okay, thank you. So the second question is that the whole dinner sequence with the camel moment, was that inspired by Wonka Wai?
Man, I mean, you watch films and you steal from everyone, and you make it your own. And if someone out here is gonna tell me that they've not wanted to do a Tarkovsky or they've not wanted to do a
Opening shot.
Yeah.
see, there we go. I'm plagiarizing already, but you're also informed by the kind of people you meet, the kind of films you watch, and a little bit of Wong Kar-wai is there, but also some of those pieces actually exist in Shillong. Like, it does have a sizable Chinese population as well, and whenever you go there, there's a kind of a decor that's very. I mean, I saw those restaurants before I saw Wong Kar-wai, but maybe the way in which I chose to capture that reality was Wong Kar-wai's.
The third question is that where can I buy your soundtrack? It's incredible, honestly.
You could bring the band here. I mean, but my producers will slaughter me, but I can give it to you on a pen drive.
Thank you.
It's also open source, right? Like,